Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The head of Marie Antoinette. On the 16th of October 1793, inside of Paris, Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, was executed on the guillotine. Months before, her husband, King Louis XVI, had also met the same fate, and he had been executed on the same device of death. But to many across France, Marie Antoinette was a figure of loathing, and she was a woman who would, whilst people were suffering, rub their poverty in their faces by living a very indulgent lifestyle. But the death of Marie Antoinette was a shocking one. But what happened to her head following the execution? Inside of the concierge, Marie Antoinette's fall from grace was huge. She was held inside of a prison, and the final 11 weeks of her life were spent inside of this cell. She was a woman who was Austrian and an Austrian princess, but in the years before her death, she embraced great frivolity of the French royal court. She would become queen 4 years after coming to France. She was 18 and was frustrated by the fact her husband had opposite tastes. But Marie would at court spend her time gambling, partying and buying lavish gifts and items, and she became known as Madame Deficit. But she did have a good heart, and she would adopt some poor children. But despite having a soft heart, she was considered a scapegoat for the problems across the nation. Millions of people were suffering, and the diamond necklace affair made things worse. A countess tricked a cardinal into buying a hugely expensive necklace on the Queen's behalf, and many believed Marie tried to get her hands on the necklace without paying for it, and this ruined her reputation. But the French Revolution would come, and the French rose up, storming the Bastille and taking up arms, and they would riot inside of many major cities over the price of bread, and they would march to the gates of Versailles. The royal couple wouldn't be officially arrested until June of 1791, when they tried to flee to Austria-controlled Netherlands. The royal family were held in the Temple, and France declared a republic. This was an end to the monarchy, which had ruled for almost 1,000 years in the country. But in the January of 1793, King Louis XVI was sentenced to death for treason against the state and the French people. He was allowed to spend some time with his family before he was executed in front of a huge crowd in Paris. But Marie Antoinette, following her husband's death, was left in prison, and she would be transferred to the concierge months before her death, which became known as the antechamber to the guillotine. And she would be held for 2 months before she was placed on trial. She was 37 years old, and her hair was white and her skin was pale. She was subjected to a 36-hour trial with 18-hour days, but huge accusations, including incest, were levelled against the Queen, and Marie would deny these. However, these accusations shocked the courtroom. She was graceful in court, but it did not save her from the executioner's block. In the hours of the 16th of October 1793, she was found guilty of high treason, depletion of the national treasury, and conspiracy against the security of the state. Shortly before her execution at the Place de la Révolution, most of the Queen's white hair was cut off. At 12:15 p.m, she walked onto the scaffold to greet Charles Henry Sampson, her executioner, who had also took the life and head of her husband, the king, months before. He was in a black mask, and he probably never believed that he would have executed the Queen of France, who was his former employer. Marie was dressed in white, and she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot, and she whispered to him, "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to." And this was her final word. Quickly Sanson strapped her to the wooden board and slid Marie under the blade before he released it. Her head was taken off in one quick blow. Sanson then held up her head and declared, "Viva la République!" But following her execution, Marie Antoinette's remains were taken around half a mile north, and they were taken to the graveyard behind the Church of Madeleine. However, at the time, the grave diggers, who had been burying many victims of the guillotine, were taking a lunch break, and whilst the Queen's remains were about to be interred, this allowed Madame Tussaud to then sneak in and take a plaster death mask and cast of her head. Following this, her body was then thrown into an unmarked grave, and this particular cemetery would be filled the following year by enemies of the Revolution. Marie Antoinette then had her head, it's believed, also thrown inside of this unmarked grave. But we know that Marie's body was exhumed on the 18th of January 1815, and then her remains were given a Christian burial of the royal remains in the necrophilis of the French kings at the Basilia of St. Denis. But from her death mask, Marie Antoinette would be brought back to life by Madame Tussaud, who utilised the plaster cast to make a model of her head, and it would show the French queen with short hair and with her eyes closed and her lips also pursed together with a mask on her face. This is the closest we have of the Queen of France's head and what it looked like following execution. Marie Antoinette, to many people, was a symbol of what was wrong with the old regime and with the monarch of France. It was a royal family that placed further financial problems onto the nation, and Marie was used as a scapegoat for this. She was a woman who had a taste for the finer things in life, and she spent a huge amount of money on renovating royal palaces with the best furniture from across Europe. But she would brutally lose her head on the guillotine, like thousands of other people and her husband would during the French Revolution. Those who witnessed her execution would not forget the moment they saw the French queen lose her head. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.